It was supposed to be just another night at the Golden Globes. Glamour, champagne, carefully scripted banter between Hollywood's brightest stars and the hosts tasked with keeping the show moving. But on January 10th, 2016, something unexpected happened. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his quick wit and fearless approach to late-night comedy, turned his attention to Sean Penn, one of the most decorated actors of his generation. And what followed was a moment of live television that no one in that room, or watching at home, could have predicted. In front of millions of viewers, with cameras rolling and no commercial break in sight, Kimmel didn't pull his punches. He asked Penn about something everyone had noticed but no one dared to mention. And Penn's reaction? It became instant viral history. Subscribe to Prime Talk, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. This wasn't a scandal fabricated by tabloids. This wasn't a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. This was a real moment, unedited and unfiltered, broadcast live across the world. It was the kind of television that reminds us why live events still matter in an age of carefully curated content and PR-approved soundbites. When Jimmy Kimmel confronted Sean Penn about smoking at the Golden Globes, he didn't just create a memorable exchange. He exposed the tension that exists when old Hollywood collides with new expectations, when personal freedom clashes with public responsibility, and when a joke stops being funny. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand who Sean Penn is. This is not just another celebrity caught in an awkward moment. This is a two-time Academy Award winner. A man who has portrayed some of the most complex characters in modern cinema. From his breakout role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High to his Oscar-winning performances in Mystic River and Milk, Penn has built a reputation as one of the most serious actors of his generation. He's known for his intensity, his commitment to his craft, and his refusal to play by Hollywood's rules. He doesn't do fluff pieces. He doesn't chase trends. He's an artist, a journalist, an activist, someone who has interviewed El Chapo and reported from war zones. Sean Penn is not someone who typically gets called out on live television. And then there's Jimmy Kimmel. By 2016, Kimmel had established himself as one of the sharpest voices in late-night television. His show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, had become known for viral moments, celebrity pranks, and segments that pushed boundaries. But when he was chosen to host the Golden Globes that year, expectations were different. The Golden Globes aren't just any award show. They are put on by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and they occupy a unique space in the entertainment calendar, less stuffy than the Oscars, more prestigious than the People's Choice Awards. The host is expected to be funny, yes, but also respectful. They are expected to roast the room gently, not ignite actual controversy. Kimmel walked into that role knowing exactly what he was doing. He understood the balance required. But he also understood that the best moments in live television happen when someone breaks the unspoken rules, when someone says what everyone else is thinking but no one else will say. And that's exactly what he did. The Golden Globes that year were held at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California. The room was packed with A-list celebrities. The champagne was flowing. The atmosphere was relaxed, celebratory. These are the conditions that make the Golden Globes feel different from other award shows. There's drinking. There's mingling. There's a sense that anything could happen. And in that environment, Sean Penn was doing something that had become increasingly rare in Hollywood events. He was smoking. Not outside. Not in a designated area. Right there, in the thick of things, visible to everyone, including the cameras broadcasting live to millions of viewers around the world. Now, let's be clear about something. Sean Penn's smoking is not news. Penn has been a smoker for decades. It's part of his image. The rebel, the nonconformist, the guy who doesn't care what you think. But smoking indoors at a major televised event in 2016, that was a different story. California has some of the strictest anti-smoking laws in the country. Smoking indoors in public spaces had been banned for years. And while the Golden Globes technically takes place in a private event space, the optics were undeniable. Here was one of Hollywood's most powerful figures, openly flouting rules that everyone else was expected to follow. And Jimmy Kimmel noticed. When Kimmel took the stage that night, he had a script. He had jokes prepared, bits planned out, transitions rehearsed. But the best hosts know when to abandon the script. They know when a moment is presenting itself, when the room is giving them something better than anything a writer could have come up with. And when Kimmel saw Sean Penn smoking, he saw that moment. What happened next wasn't malicious. It wasn't a coordinated attack. But it was deliberate. Kimmel made a choice, in real time, to address what everyone was seeing. He made a choice to confront Sean Penn, on live television, in front of his peers, in front of the world. And that choice turned a casual observation into a defining moment of the night. The stakes here are bigger than they might seem at first. This wasn't just about smoking. It was about privilege. It was about the rules that apply to some people and not to others. It was about whether Hollywood would continue to protect its icons or whether a new generation of hosts and commentators would be willing to call them out. Jimmy Kimmel, in that moment, had to decide which side of that line he was on. And what makes this moment even more fascinating is that it wasn't planned. There was no meeting beforehand where producers said, "Hey, if you see Sean Penn smoking, make sure to call him out." There was no prepared joke in Kimmel's notes. This was pure instinct. This was a comedian and host seeing something happening in real time and deciding, on the spot, to address it. That's what makes live television so powerful. That's what makes these moments so rare. Because once the words leave Kimmel's mouth, there's no taking them back. There's no edit. There's no do-over. It's out there, and everyone, including Sean Penn, has to deal with it. The anticipation in that room must have been electric. Because everyone knew Sean Penn's reputation. Everyone knew he wasn't someone who took criticism lightly. Everyone knew that confronting him, even in jest, was a risk. And yet Kimmel did it anyway. What happened next would define both men in ways neither could have fully anticipated. To fully appreciate what happened that night, you need to understand the climate of Hollywood in early 2016. This was a time of transition. The industry was grappling with questions of accountability, privilege, and the old guard's refusal to change. Social media had given audiences a direct line to celebrities, and with that came a new level of scrutiny. The days when stars could behave however they wanted behind closed doors, or even in public, were fading. The culture was shifting, and not everyone was shifting with it. Sean Penn represented something specific in that cultural landscape. He was a symbol of the old Hollywood, the era when actors could be difficult, temperamental, even volatile, and it was seen as part of their mystique. Penn's career had been built on intensity. His performances were raw, often uncomfortable, always demanding. He didn't hide his temper. He didn't soften his edges for public consumption. In many ways, his refusal to conform was part of his appeal. He was real in an industry built on artifice. But that authenticity came with baggage. Penn had been involved in numerous controversies over the years. His relationship with the press was famously contentious. He'd been accused of assaulting photographers, gotten into public altercations, and made headlines for his combative personality. In 1987, he was sentenced to jail time after pleading no contest to assault charges. His marriage to Madonna had been tabloid fodder for years, with rumors of volatility and conflict. Whether fair or not, Sean Penn carried a reputation as someone you didn't mess with. By 2016, though, Penn had also evolved in some ways. He'd become more politically active, more engaged with global issues. His interview with El Chapo, published just days before the Golden Globes, had dominated headlines. It was a bold, controversial piece of journalism. Whether you saw it as courageous or reckless depended on your perspective. But it reminded everyone that Penn was more than just an actor. He was someone willing to put himself in dangerous situations, to ask difficult questions, to push boundaries. And yet, here he was, smoking indoors at an award show, seemingly unconcerned with the rules everyone else followed. Jimmy Kimmel, on the other hand, represented a newer Hollywood sensibility. He'd come up through comedy, not drama. His career had been built on connecting with audiences, not alienating them. Kimmel's humor could be biting, but it was rarely mean-spirited. He punched up, not down. He made fun of himself as often as he made fun of others. And crucially, he understood the power of live television. He'd built his career on moments that felt spontaneous, real, unscripted. He knew that the best television happens when you take risks. Hosting the Golden Globes was a risk in itself. The show has a reputation for being loose, unpredictable, sometimes chaotic. Past hosts had ranged from Ricky Gervais, who turned his opening monologues into brutal roast sessions, to Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, who brought a more playful, affectionate energy. Kimmel had to find his own tone, his own approach. And part of that approach was staying present, staying aware, and being willing to improvise. As the show unfolded, Kimmel was hitting his marks. The jokes were landing. The crowd was engaged. Everything was going according to plan. But behind the scenes, something else was building. Producers, camera operators, and other attendees had noticed Sean Penn smoking. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. And in the age of social media, it was already starting to generate buzz. People watching at home were tweeting about it. Journalists in the room were taking note. The question wasn't whether someone would address it, but who would be willing to do so on live television. Kimmel made that choice because he understood something fundamental about comedy and about live events. The biggest laughs, the most memorable moments, come from truth. They come from acknowledging the elephant in the room. And Sean Penn smoking indoors at the Golden Globes was a very visible elephant. But there's a calculation that happens in that moment. Kimmel had to weigh the potential upside, a great, spontaneous moment of television, against the potential downside. What if Penn reacted badly? What if the joke fell flat? What if it created tension that derailed the rest of the show? These are the kinds of decisions hosts make in real time, and they don't always have the luxury of getting it right. The atmosphere in the room was already charged. This was the 73rd Golden Globes, and it came at a particularly fraught time in Hollywood. The Oscars were about to face intense criticism over the lack of diversity in their nominations, sparking the Oscars so-so-white movement. Questions about power, privilege, and who gets to set the rules were dominating industry conversations. And here was Sean Penn, a white male icon of Hollywood, openly smoking in a space where it was prohibited, while everyone else followed the rules. Whether Kimmel consciously connected those dots or simply acted on instinct, the result was the same. He was about to step into a moment that would crystallize all of those tensions into a single exchange. It's worth noting that confrontations like this don't happen in a vacuum. Kimmel had spent years building credibility as someone who could navigate tricky situations. He'd interviewed presidents and pop stars, handled controversial topics, and earned a reputation as someone who was thoughtful even when he was being funny. That credibility gave him permission to take risks. It gave him the space to say things that might not have landed coming from someone else. And Penn. He'd spent years cultivating an image as someone who didn't care about Hollywood politics, who operated by his own rules. That image was about to be tested in the most public way possible. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. And Jimmy Kimmel was about to do what great hosts do: turn an observation into a moment into a conversation, and a conversation into something unforgettable. The moment arrived without warning, as the best live television moments always do. Jimmy Kimmel was on stage, moving through his hosting duties with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The energy in the room was good. The audience was with him. And then, mid-sentence, he pivoted. His eyes found Sean Penn in the crowd. The camera followed. "What are you doing? Are you smoking?" Kimmel's voice carried across the ballroom, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and muted conversations. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a private aside. It was loud, clear, and unmistakably direct. The room shifted. You could feel it, even through the television screen. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Every camera in the venue swung toward Sean Penn. Penn, cigarette in hand, looked up. For a fraction of a second, there was silence. Not awkward silence, but the kind of silence that precedes something significant. The kind of silence that happens when everyone knows a line is about to be crossed. Kimmel didn't wait for an answer. "You can't smoke in here," he continued, his tone hovering somewhere between joking and serious. It was the kind of delivery that gave Penn an out. He could laugh it off, play along, treat it as banter. But it was also firm enough that it couldn't be ignored. Penn's face was inscrutable. He took another drag from his cigarette. Slowly, deliberately. The message was clear. I'm not apologizing. I'm not explaining. I'm not stopping. Kimmel, to his credit, didn't back down. "You can't smoke in here," he repeated, this time with a slight edge. The joke was wearing thin, and what remained was the actual confrontation. A host calling out one of the most powerful actors in the room for breaking the rules, on live television, with no script to fall back on. The audience was frozen. Some people laughed nervously, unsure if this was part of the bit or something more real. Others stayed silent, watching the exchange unfold with the kind of tension usually reserved for dramatic film scenes. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't planned. This was two men, two very different public figures, navigating a moment neither had prepared for. Penn finally responded, but not with words. He gestured casually, almost dismissively, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" It was a power move, a refusal to be shamed or scolded, even in jest. Penn wasn't playing Kimmel's game. He was making it clear that he operated by different rules. And that's when the true weight of the moment hit. This wasn't about smoking. It was about power. It was about who gets to challenge whom. It was about the unspoken hierarchy of Hollywood, where some people are untouchable and others are expected to fall in line. Kimmel, sensing the tension, tried to redirect. He made another joke, something light, something designed to ease the room back into comfortable territory. But the damage, or depending on your perspective, the revelation, was done. The exchange had happened. It had been broadcast live to millions. And there was no taking it back. What made this moment so extraordinary wasn't just the confrontation itself. It was the fact that it happened in real time, with no editing, no second takes, no ability for either party to control the narrative. Live television is unforgiving. It captures everything: the hesitation, the body language, the micro-expressions that would be smoothed over in a taped segment. And in this case, it captured something most people never see: a genuine clash of wills between two men who both believed they were in the right. Penn's refusal to put out the cigarette wasn't defiance for the sake of defiance. It was a statement about autonomy, about personal freedom, about refusing to be told what to do. In his mind, this was likely a minor thing, a non-issue, something that shouldn't have been made into a spectacle. But the fact that it was happening at the Golden Globes, in front of the industry, in front of the world, elevated it beyond a personal choice. It became symbolic. Kimmel's decision to call it out wasn't about being the morality police. It was about doing his job as a host, which includes acknowledging the absurdity of the moment. It was about giving voice to what everyone else was thinking. And it was about refusing to let something so visibly rule-breaking go unaddressed just because the person doing it was powerful. The cameras lingered on Penn for a moment longer than necessary. You could see him processing, deciding how to respond. You could see the calculations happening in real time. And then, just as quickly as the moment had arrived, it passed. Kimmel moved on to the next bit. The show continued. The audience relaxed. But the moment didn't disappear. It couldn't. Because it had been seen. It had been recorded. It had been broadcast live. And within minutes, it was being dissected on social media, replayed on news outlets, debated in living rooms across the country. This is the power and the danger of live television. Once something happens, it exists forever. There's no erasing it, no spinning it, no controlling how it will be interpreted. Jimmy Kimmel had created a moment that would outlive the show itself. And Sean Penn, whether he intended to or not, had become the center of a conversation that was about so much more than smoking. The question now was how both men, and the industry watching them, would respond. The immediate aftermath of the exchange was palpable. The energy in the Beverly Hilton ballroom had shifted, and everyone in that room, from the celebrities seated at tables to the crew managing cameras, could feel it. What had started as a typical Golden Globes ceremony had just become something else. Something more unpredictable. Something that reminded everyone why live events still matter. Jimmy Kimmel, ever the professional, moved forward with the show. He didn't dwell on the moment. He didn't circle back to it. He understood that sometimes the best thing you can do after creating a viral moment is to let it breathe, to let it exist without over-explaining it. He continued with his scripted material, introduced the next presenter, kept the show on track. But there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. A kind of awareness that he'd just crossed a line, that he'd engaged in something that wasn't part of the plan. For Sean Penn, the moment was different. He remained seated at his table, cigarette still in hand for a brief time before eventually putting it out. He didn't storm off. He didn't make a scene. He simply continued existing in the space as if nothing significant had happened. And in a way, that was its own statement. Penn wasn't going to give Kimmel or the audience the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. He wasn't going to apologize or explain. He was going to remain exactly who he'd always been, unapologetic, unbothered, unmoved by public opinion. But the people around Penn noticed. Other celebrities at nearby tables exchanged glances. Some smiled uncomfortably. Others looked away, not wanting to be associated with the moment. In Hollywood, these kinds of public call-outs are rare. The industry protects its own. There's an unspoken code of conduct that says you don't publicly embarrass your peers, especially not at an event like the Golden Globes. Kimmel had broken that code, and the room was still processing what it meant. Outside the ballroom, in control rooms and production offices, producers were already anticipating the fallout. They knew the clip would be everywhere within minutes. They knew it would be the most talked-about moment of the night, possibly overshadowing the actual award winners. And they were right. Before the ceremony had even ended, The video was circulating on Twitter, on Facebook, on every entertainment news site. Headlines were being written. Think pieces were being drafted. The moment had escaped the confines of the event itself and entered the larger cultural conversation. What made the aftermath so fascinating was the range of reactions. Some people praised Kimmel for his boldness, for being willing to call out behavior that others would have ignored. They saw it as a necessary check on privilege, a reminder that even Hollywood's biggest stars aren't above the rules. Others criticized him for making a spectacle out of a minor issue, for turning what could have been a private conversation into a public humiliation. They argued that Kimmel had overstepped, that he'd used his position as host to punch down at someone who was simply trying to enjoy the event. And then there were those who focused on Penn. Some defended him, arguing that smoking was his choice, that the rules were overblown, that Hollywood had become too sanitized and that Penn represented a bygone era of authenticity. Others condemned him, pointing out that laws exist for a reason, that secondhand smoke is harmful, that his wealth and status didn't exempt him from basic courtesy. What's important to recognize is that both interpretations had validity. This wasn't a clear-cut case of right and wrong. It was a collision of values, of expectations, of different ideas about what public behavior should look like. And that's what made it so compelling. It wasn't scripted drama. It was real tension, playing out in real time, with real consequences. Inside the ballroom, as the show continued, there was a noticeable change in atmosphere. The looseness, the casual energy that had characterized the early part of the evening had been replaced by something more guarded. Celebrities were more aware of the cameras. They were more conscious of how they were being perceived. The reminder that they were being watched, that their actions could become instant fodder for public scrutiny, had been delivered in the most direct way possible. Jimmy Kimmel, for his part, seemed energized by the moment rather than deterred. He continued hosting with the same sharpness and timing, perhaps even emboldened by the knowledge that he'd created something memorable. For a host, especially one doing live television, these moments are gold. They are what separate a competent performance from a legendary one. Kimmel had taken a risk, and regardless of how people felt about it, the risk had paid off in terms of creating must-see television. But the real test would come after the show. How would the media cover it? How would Sean Penn respond in the days and weeks that followed? Would this be a one-night story, quickly forgotten in the endless churn of Hollywood gossip, or would it become something more lasting? As the Golden Globes came to a close, as winners gave their speeches and attendees prepared to head to after-parties, the Kimmel-Penn moment was already being cemented as the night's defining image. Not the awards themselves, not the speeches, but a brief, unscripted exchange between a host and an actor, caught live on camera, that revealed something true about power, privilege, and the changing culture of Hollywood. The cameras had captured it all. The words, the looks, the tension. And now it belonged to the world to interpret, to debate, to remember. In the days following the Golden Globes, the Kimmel-Penn smoking moment took on a life of its own. Entertainment news outlets dissected every second of the exchange. Body language experts weighed in on Penn's reaction. Media critics debated whether Kimmel had gone too far or not far enough. The clip was viewed millions of times, shared across platforms, and became a touchstone for larger conversations about celebrity behavior and accountability. What became clear in the aftermath was that this moment mattered not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. It was a microcosm of the tensions brewing in Hollywood and in American culture more broadly. Questions about who gets to break the rules and who gets held accountable. Questions about whether wealth and fame should exempt people from basic social expectations. Questions about how we balance personal freedom with collective responsibility. For Jimmy Kimmel, the moment became part of his legacy as a host. It was added to the highlight reel of his fearless, no-holds-barred approach to live television. It reinforced his reputation as someone willing to say what others won't, to take risks that could backfire, to create moments that feel genuine rather than manufactured. In interviews afterward, Kimmel addressed the incident with his characteristic humor, but he didn't apologize. He stood by the choice to call it out, framing it as something any reasonable person would have noticed and commented on. For Sean Penn, the impact was more complex. On one hand, it reinforced his image as a rebel, as someone who refuses to conform to Hollywood's increasingly corporate, sanitized culture. His fans saw it as evidence of his authenticity, his refusal to play by rules he didn't agree with. But it also reinforced less flattering perceptions, that he was entitled, that he believed himself above the standards applied to others, that his disregard for convention sometimes crossed into disrespect. Penn never issued a formal statement about the incident. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't engage with the controversy at all. In many ways, his silence was more powerful than any response could have been. It said, "This isn't worth my time. This isn't worth addressing. You can think whatever you want." And for Penn, that approach was entirely consistent with how he'd navigated his entire career. But the broader cultural conversation didn't end there. The Kimmel-Penn moment became a reference point in ongoing debates about privilege and accountability. It was cited in articles about Hollywood's old guard clinging to outdated behaviors. It appeared in discussions about how live television creates moments of truth that pre-recorded, heavily edited content can't replicate. It became a teaching moment, an example of how a single interaction can reveal deeper truths about power dynamics and cultural change. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it occurred at a specific inflection point in Hollywood history. This was 2016, the same year that would later be recognized as the beginning of the end for the old power structures in the industry. The Me Too movement was on the horizon. Conversations about diversity, inclusion, and accountability were intensifying. The days when powerful men could do whatever they wanted without consequences were numbered, even if no one fully realized it yet. The Kimmel-Penn exchange didn't cause these changes, but it reflected them. It showed that the protective bubble around Hollywood's elite was developing cracks, that hosts, journalists, and audiences were becoming more willing to question behavior that had previously been accepted or ignored. That live television, with its lack of editorial control, could create moments of accountability that felt increasingly rare in an industry built on image management. Years later, the moment still gets referenced. It appears in compilations of awkward award show moments. It's studied in film and media classes as an example of how unscripted interactions can become cultural artifacts. It's remembered not because it was the most dramatic confrontation or the most consequential scandal, but because it was real. It was two people, in a moment of live television, revealing something true about themselves and about the culture they inhabited. For those of us watching from home, it was a reminder that live events still have power. In an age of carefully curated social media personas, of PR teams managing every public appearance, of celebrities controlling their narratives with precision, there's something valuable about watching people navigate unexpected situations in real time. The Kimmel-Penn moment gave us that. It gave us a glimpse behind the curtain, a moment where the usual scripts didn't apply, where two people had to be themselves, for better or worse. And ultimately, that's why this moment endures. Not because smoking indoors is some great moral crisis, but because the exchange revealed truths about power, about privilege, about the changing expectations we have for public figures. It showed us Jimmy Kimmel at his sharpest, willing to take risks in service of great television. It showed us Sean Penn at his most defiant, unwilling to bend to social pressure or public opinion. And it showed us an industry in transition, caught between old values and new demands. The cameras captured it all, live and unedited, and preserved it for anyone who wants to understand how Hollywood talks to itself, how power operates in public spaces, and how a single question can change the energy of an entire room. If you want more deep dives into the moments that define celebrity culture, the confrontations that reveal hidden truths, and the live television moments that remind us why unscripted interactions still matter, subscribe to Prime Talk. Hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments about whether Kimmel was right to call out Penn or whether he crossed a line, and share this video with anyone who appreciates real, unfiltered moments in an increasingly polished world. Because these are the stories that show us who people really are when the scripts run out and the cameras keep rolling.